I think our clean context is going to be exactly like this. Hi, everybody. I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. You can probably thank our good friends from Facebook for all of this problems we're having today. At least I'm going to blame it on them. So, look, many observers liken to the aftermath of a nuclear explosion. What is that? Well, it's the bomb that dropped mid-August on the vaping industry. And over the past 2 months, the fallout resulting from the so-called vaping-related lung illness poisoned public perception and vaping and fueled a devastating chain reaction of e-cigarette flavor bans across the country. Is there a possibility for the U.S. vaping industry to recover? Well, today on RegWatch, we hope to find out, as our guest Chris Howard is a true industry insider. Howard is a general counsel and CCO at Alternative Solutions. He's former general counsel and CCO of Fontem Ventures, which is Blue eCigs, and he holds a leadership role with the country's largest advocacy organization, the Vapor Technology Association, where he's treasurer and board member. And let's welcome now Mr. Howard to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Brent. Thanks.
Well, that's good to hear. So we are having some tech problems here. I'll sort it out as we go. Why don't you take a moment and fill our audience in about your background, because it is quite extensive when it comes to vaping, is it not?
Uh, yeah, I guess given the context of how long vaping has really been in the U.S., I currently I'm a general counsel and chief compliance officer for Alternative Solutions. We're a sister company of Swisher International, the cigar company. Been here for almost 3.5 years. Prior to this, I was with I started with Lorillard, and we acquired Blue, and I was a primary lawyer for Blue. As you probably know, Lorillard was acquired by Reynolds, and they spun Blue off into the Imperial network, and ultimately I became the general counsel and chief compliance officer for Fontem Ventures, which was based in Amsterdam, but that was the headquarters for Blue. I was in that role for a while, and then came to here. So it's been in the e-cig space, the vapor industry, for about eight years.
Which, for most people, that actually is a full career and an entire lifetime.
Yes, and it feels like multiple lifetimes in this particular industry, given the ups and downs which we've been dealing with really since the beginning. Been pre-deeming, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about that. So we do have a lot to talk about here today, and we'll go through some stuff online as far as we can. So clearly, the vaping industry is in major trouble, as well as Sean Casey from Flavor Art, who's a great supporter of ours, said, it's a nuclear disaster in the U.S. I mean, it does feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, no question. And Sean's got away with words, and that's a pretty darn accurate description of what we're dealing with. We used to refer to it sort of as a roller coaster. And I realized recently when I was presenting at the Vapor Technology Association annual event with our Day on the Hill, that if this is a roller coaster, it's pretty much the worst one I've ever been on, because it kind of only just keeps going down and never comes back up. And we're certainly right now at the lowest point that the industry's been really since its inception here in the U.S.
So from the VTA's position, you're at the top of the chain there. What is the organization seeing in terms of its members and the impact?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of anxiety. I mean, no question. So I'm on the executive committee of the Vapor Technology Association. I work very closely with our executive director Tony Aboud and our president Brittany Cushman. And we did just come out of our annual event, which the timing was great. I mean, unfortunately great, given the activity both at the federal and state level regarding all these flavor bans and that sort of thing. If I had any word to sum up what the reaction was from attendees at this event, I mean, they're very nervous, and they're really looking for hope and guidance on how to navigate the challenges that we're facing now. So a group that ordinarily seems very confident in their mission, and they're obviously very passionate about harm reduction and their commitment to smokers' needs, is now consumed with the fate of the industry and wondering if they'll even be able to provide a service to smokers moving forward. It definitely dominated the event.
What is the likelihood of this of the industry coming out in some kind of a recovery mode?
Look, I don't think the industry's gone. I don't think it's over. And I said when I was presenting at the VTA event, I mean, I said, look, now is not the time to throw in the towel. Most of the people there have been along for the ride and fighting with everything they have to for reasonable regulation. They're all making massive changes to their marketing practices and doing everything they can to preserve access to flavors in particular, but eCigs generally for smokers. I don't think that the story is over. I think we are definitely at a crossroads here, and that for some, I'm sure in New York and Michigan and Massachusetts, it feels like it's over, but it's really not over till it is over. We've got a couple of hurdles in front of us, but I still encourage the groups not to throw in the towel.
Well, and yeah, that I mean, I don't know what else could you say. Really, there is still a fight going on, and let's talk a bit about the states that where there are bans in place. So, what's the picture like across the country? Because it seems like with every single day, there seems to be another place popping up, and it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah, it's funny because you can't really put together any slides on this issue because literally you wake up the next day and you got to redo your slides, which many of us are learning the hard way. But as you probably know, there are the three first ones are the Michigan, New York, and Massachusetts. Massachusetts being the most onerous, I banned the whole category, but New York and Michigan move forward with executive measures via emergency provisions to ban flavors in light of all of the issues that are surrounding the category. And then more recently, and most people in our industry know this, Washington, Oregon, Rhode Island, I think Montana was just a day or so ago, and several others are still considering it. So we've got our hands full. And in light of all these, there are many active lawsuits out there to prevent this enforcement. Much of them argue that this is a significant overreach by the governors in these various states. Mm-hmm. And we've had varying degrees of success depending on which state we're talking about.
So I've got right here, if you can take a look at that first article that I gave you in the Post, and this is from the New York Times, so I'm showing this right now to the audience. It's cases and deaths. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and state agencies have reported 1,300 lung injury cases and 31 deaths linked to vaping. And that map shows the overview. There's no real actual cluster that appears to be happening with the vaping-related lung illnesses. And this is in yesterday's or the day before's New York Times. So what the Times is doing is kind of reorientating the argument to not why did CDC and FDA fail, but they are speaking about it as something slowed the regulators down that then allowed this scourge to happen. And this is the map then of the vaping regulations. Regulations. Several states and cities have announced or enacted vaping bans in response to the recent illnesses and deaths. And as you said, this could have already changed a little bit, but it does definitely show most of the states. Did you say Delaware? Was it Montana?
Montana is the most recent.
Yeah, and that's on this list. So
yeah.
You can see that, Chris, there. Yeah, is there anything missing? Because you've got that list in front of you there in that map. Does that seem about accurate?
Yeah, look, it seems about accurate. I certainly don't know every state that's reported, an injury or a death, unfortunately. But I will say it's funny because, and you happen to have chosen this article to talk about. And this article, just the headline alone, characterizes what we're facing here. I mean, it doesn't highlight the necessary, the truth of the matter. It calls it a vaping illness tracker, suggesting that we're talking about vaping traditional nicotine products when in reality, it's not necessarily a vaping illness tracker. This problem is primarily related to the THC black market vaping products, not the traditional products that have been on the market for 10 years without incident. So that's what we're dealing with, is exactly what's memorialized in this headline, and that is the conflation of issues. One being that the overwhelming majority of these problems relate to THC products sold on the black market and what happens The media is not being clear, and certainly hasn't been being clear, to highlight that traditional nicotine vaping products are not the primary cause here. So this is what we're dealing with on a daily basis. I don't want to overgeneralize. There are some outlets that are doing their part to sort of correct the story, and even some of the regulatory agencies have offered clarity now, including CDC, FDA. Former Commissioner Gottlieb himself is out there, trying to clear the air. But it's not easy. I mean, this conflation is what's in large part led to the problem.
Yeah, and certainly it seems that while the industry might be making some headway one day with a little bit of good news, as we reported last week, on Thursday, CDC came out and tripled down on their vaping and e-cigarette only. I mean, the complete total headline on their release. And by the way, Chris, and for our audience, part of the technical stuff going on here is Chris can't see exactly what I'm showing everybody like normal. So I might be referencing this a little bit different than normal. We've put together some of the posts we're going to be talking about today here up on a page here on RegWatch, so then Chris can see what we're talking about. But Chris, the very last post that I have there is the CDC outbreak of lung injury. And to your point, in terms of headlines, in a way, I can't blame the CDC, I can't blame media when the CDC is coming out with headlines like this and subsequent alert so late in the game.
Yeah, and look, and that's really where it started, was with the CDC's generalizations in their headlines. I shouldn't call them headlines, but in their reports, they didn't distinguish clearly, and in part, in fairness to them, they probably didn't know. But rather than take any chances, I guess they decided it was appropriate to tell people not to vape at all. And of course, once they do that, a source which most people believe and should believe for many topics, the media just picks up on that message and runs with it. And just like the media does with anything, only part of the story gets reported, and the most sensational part ends up in the headline. And I think that's in large part, that's what's happened here.
Yeah. Now, do you think that specifically CDC has a purposeful position here, like they have an intent to cause harm to the industry?
No, it's certainly, you go on Twitter and you'll find many people that think that, but I don't believe that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist when it comes to the industry, and I think most people who know me recognize that. I think CDC probably could have taken action quicker to start correcting the issue. I think there's an evolution here, and they are correcting it now. My fear is that this correction has come too late. I mean, you probably know this, but it was a big topic of discussion at the VTA conference. I mean, sales were down in the category 40% on average, I think, across the board, somewhere between 35 and 40. And so my question is the damage already done? And can we recover completely in light of what's happened here? In other words, can we get back to where we were before all this? I don't think that happens in the near future. But can we get consumers back to thinking about harm reduction without thinking about lung illnesses and death when it comes to traditional nicotine vaping products? It's going to take a while, I believe. It's going to take a while.
So let's talk, I'm just absorbing that. It's going to take a while. It's a bit bleak. Let's just stay on that for a moment. That is a bit bleak.
Yeah. Yeah, no question. It is bleak, but when you have multiple states creating a patchwork of bans while we're all waiting for action by the FDA, which we know is forthcoming, look, we've got our hands full here, and it's not free. It's time consuming. It's expensive. It was already difficult enough trying to ensure that harm reduction was considered part of the equation in light of the National Youth Tobacco Survey data and what that has shown over the past couple of years. But now it's even worse. And you can imagine the anti-vaping activists and many in public health are capitalizing on this. And so we're definitely on the defensive, I should say. And so it's not an even playing field right now.
That's true. Okay, so let's talk about some of the bright spots, at least. It's bright spots only in temporary measures, I guess, but we've certainly had some wins in court. We had a setback today. But let's talk first about where are where is VTA fighting?
Yeah.
And
Look,
how are the fights going state by state?
I can't reveal our litigation strategy and that sort of thing. So, so you understand that. But I can tell you where we've come. In New York was the first, what I'll call a victory. After a setback in the district court, we got a new life in the appellate court, and they did grant a temporary restraining order until the hearing on the motion for preliminary injunction, which is in the next couple of days. So rather than immediate, I can't remember the date that the enforcement was supposed to start occurring in New York, we got a reprieve, and now we live to fight another day in the upcoming hearing for the motion for preliminary injunction, which would be a longer term stay. So that's a victory. We should know more, hopefully, this week, and certainly no later than next week, I would think. Michigan had a significant victory where a lawsuit was filed there. There were actually a couple of lawsuits filed in Michigan, and a preliminary injunction was granted. So that was a super positive development. Massachusetts, we can call it a setback. I mean, there was some technical issues with the filing. I wouldn't go overboard here and say that it means it's over in Massachusetts. There's still a lot of cards to be played. We still haven't gotten to the substantive heart of the matter there, and I'm optimistic that we have good results there too. As far as the other states where the lawsuits haven't been filed, VTA is committed to taking action in each state that decides to choose this executive measure. By that I mean relying on their emergency provisions and their just like these other states have done. So we will move forward and actively challenge the bans in the other states that I've mentioned, and any other in future states that decide to go this route as well.
So without revealing strategy, but for those of us that miss the fine print, or we do have to rely actually on journalists to write up these stories, and so we know that they're not all accurate. So what are the, without revealing strategy, what has been kind of the points in which you could argue? Because of course, in Michigan, they have pretty wide executive power, at least, down. So is it challenging the executive power, or are you challenging technicalities? A lot of people just have this feeling that in the United States of America, you can't take away people's liberty like this. And, the states seem to be saying, oh, yes, we can.
Yeah, fair enough. And look, I would say there's two strategies without getting into the strategies. Obviously, at this short-term phase, when we're trying to obtain a temporary restraining order or preliminary injunction, we're focusing on the fact that these bans are causing irreparable harm. In other words, when you put a flavor ban in place, vapor shops across the state will close overnight. They will not be able to survive a model whereby they only sell tobacco-flavored e-liquids. Every one of them will say that the majority of their consumers, the smokers who are visiting the vape shop to purchase e-liquids, for whatever purpose, usually to reduce their cigarette intake, most, if not all of them, are purchasing flavors. So if you're left with just tobacco, vape shops are closing their doors, which, in my opinion, and certainly in our arguments, constitutes irreparable harm. Also, in this short-term phase, we have to show a likelihood of success on the merits, which gets back to your other point about what are we looking for in the long term, what are we challenging here, and we are saying that it's really an overreach, that the governors of these states and the other high-level administrators don't have unfettered discretion to do whatever they want in the name of an emergency. There's much more of an analysis that goes on to, and it differs in each state, but where we do lodge these challenges, it's because they've exceeded their authority, and they haven't considered all the relevant factors in order to take that measure.
Yeah, you would think that at some point, a judge might go, well, if they do that for this product, could they not do that for any product?
Exactly, and we've seen that it's been tried in states before with other products, and they've also been successfully challenged, much like we hope that happens here. The difference in this case is, as you know, this is extremely politically charged, this issue. And so even though you might think it's a sure thing to win on various elements of what constitutes overreach, it doesn't always play out that way. And so while we have a degree of confidence in our position, a very strong degree of confidence, it's no guarantee in light of all of the moving pieces that are happening at every level of the government.
Now, there's a lot of players that are involved in the vaping industry. A lot, 14,000 small retailers on one side. You've got a large number of manufacturers that certainly, drive the industry in terms of product. You've got the device manufacturers over in China, and then you've got big tobacco.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a big part of the problem, is it not?
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly every group has their own interests, which are more important to them, right? Obviously a vape shop sees the end of flavors as being the end of their livelihood and the closing of their stores, whereas Juul, on the other hand, and I don't mean to speak for them, but I could certainly envision them saying, "Hey, we'll be okay if only tobacco and menthol are allowed. We'll make it through this." So it's hard to find that commonality in all the groups, but that's one of the things that vapor technology does: is we bring together all kinds of parties in the industry, and we try to find common interests where we can, and then we capitalize on that to move forward with a collective strategy, with a sort of an industry consensus. And we do that in the litigation front. We also do that when we work with regulators to try to come up with this reasonable regulation, which we've been supporting from day one.
Now, I should ask you, I mean, we've been covering this industry now for 4 years in Canada and the US extensively. The one thing that we get a lot of is feedback from viewers and people out there in the vaping community that, usually are griping about advocacy agencies, all of them, right? And fair enough, this is, passionate topic, and a lot of money does go to the advocacy groups too as well. So, from VTA's point of view, you've got small members and retailers, and you've also got big members. Juul was just with you guys. There is some big tobacco influence, with VTA, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And so give us some understanding on how you negotiate that. So instead of me asking you a hardball question that says, or do you take big tobacco money or anything like that? Because, I think there's no way that this industry can be divorced from that issue. So I don't really necessarily think it's something to be branded with, to chase people with, but it causes issues. And how do you manage representing the smaller companies that are in open systems while also having some allegiance to the closed systems and the bigger guys, which is, even your own company?
Yeah, sure. Look, we would definitely be EAS would land on the bigger side. Certainly not as big as the Juul or the big tobacco, but bigger than an independent vape shop, that's for sure. Frankly, we look for a lot of ways to find commonality in our interests and things that we can do together to make a difference. In fact, the VTA, one of our standards for membership is you have to agree to a certain set of marketing practices, which we developed 2 or 3 years ago. These marketing practices are designed with the sole purpose of limiting access and exposure of vaping products to youth. And it's something that everyone, regardless of whether you're a mom and pop vape shop or if you're a big tobacco player, that you can get behind and support. And we actively have pushed for reasonable marketing standards or marketing restrictions, I'll even say, in an effort to waylay some of this more draconian regulation that's pending now. In addition, we all have a common interest of succeeding on the PMTA process, and you probably know this from some of the other shows that I've seen on your program, but the PMTA requirements are somewhat vague. And there's a lot of discretion that FDA has on what they're looking for in terms of their expectations. And so we work together with the small manufacturers and with the vape shops and with the big ones, and to try to come up with what is reasonable to make sure that ultimately FDA is in the best position to evaluate whether eCigs are a benefit to public health. And so despite the fact that, sure, I know an open system manufacturer is going to be predisposed to making sure that regulation protects open systems as opposed to, say, a nicotine salt-based closed product, you can still find a lot of ways to work together, which I believe helps. That's what FDA is looking for. They're looking for industry consensus. That's what Congress is looking for. Everyone's got the same goal, and I should be very clear on this. No one in the Vapor Technology Association believes or thinks that vaping products are for children, and they are really meant for smokers who are looking for an alternative. And with that as our mission, we've been able to find a lot of ways to work together, despite the fact that the interests are sometimes different.
Strange. It's strange that somehow the entire industry gets pushed into this one issue when it comes to children. It makes sense, because if you look back to the entire history that FDA has with tobacco, going all the way back to 96, I believe, or was it 92 with the FDA rule?
Yeah.
The FDA rule. People don't, if you go and search for that, it's going to be hard to find because it's this thing that, it's a thing but not a thing. And it was the FDA's first attempt to try to get their hands on, regulatory hands on tobacco. And if you read that, the FDA rule, it's all about the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you look, the Tobacco Control Act and all of that activity provided a lot of learnings, which many companies, I think, took to heart and tried to live by those as sort of a guide when developing their own policies internally. In fact, many of the marketing standards, which VTA now requires as a standard for membership, I mean, look, they're based on those same principles. We know how to do this. Unfortunately, some companies, some higher profile companies, did not necessarily learn from history, and whether it's inadvertent or not, they fell into the trap, and youth took to those products. I mean, that is probably how we ended up here. Is sort of a lackadaisical attitude about the topic that went on for a little bit too long.
It's like the industry. I say we, and that's just covering this so much. I shouldn't be doing that, obviously, from a news point of view. But it's as if the industry didn't realize that they were a vice industry. They didn't realize that they were tobacco because, of course, the whole raison d'etre of vaping was the fact that we are not smoking. There was a virtue, a righteousness, well-deserved, a mission to be as far away as smoking as possible to save people's lives from smoking. So what happened is that there were blinders on and an inability to see that regulators and the public and the politicians consider them some weird associated smoking thing. And that meant that the biggest weakness and danger for tobacco, which was the kids, was the Achilles heel for vaping. And no one really understood that.
Well, it's a shame, and I've been an advocate for stronger, stricter marketing practices since my first day in this industry. I mean, I've worked with tobacco companies before and understand the background. And what I'll say is this. I don't think that all these vape shops and Juul and others, I don't think it was intentional. I don't think they were targeting kids, on purpose. I think they used a lot of, many of them, I'm not calling out anyone specifically, but many of them used a lot of kid-friendly imagery, which just because that they thought that was cool or it was easy, people they just weren't thinking about it. And when this industry started, I'll take it back to 2012 when I got involved. I remember one of the first presentations I ever gave was at a vape event or something like this. And so here's me, a lawyer, going to present at this thing. And my big thing was to introduce this concept of voluntary marketing standards. So this was before VTA had that and all this. And I walked in that room, and once I could see through the vape clouds, obviously, I mean, there were so many cartoons. I mean, a cartoon mascot of a bunny came and hugged me around. I mean, it was, and here's me, I'm getting ready to go present on Don't Use Cartoons. And I'll say this, that was a while ago. You fast forward to now, and you go in these vape forums and things like this, and there's been a learning. I mean, I don't think enough time has passed to let all these changes take effect, in my opinion. But I will say, I'll speak for the majority of the VTA members. None of them are doing those things like they were before. I mean, you could turn to some of the other newer industries like, cannabis and CBD, and I think they're going to go through their own learning. But in vapor, it's unfortunate because that could have been addressed earlier, and we might not be in the situation we're in today.
Well, I do agree with you. I think that Juul inadvertently handed vaping opponents, the biggest weapon, which is to be able to go at the kids. I think the industry was holding on for a while against that because there has been now about 3 years of our coverage where there's been a big push from industry, certainly since 2016, to do something about the marketing. And we covered your marketing standards. And Tony had come on our show and spoke about it too. So definitely, I still see a lot of that kids-orientated. It's not targeted to kids, but it's targeted to the kid within, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. You call something a Captain Crunch, and of course it's going to resonate for me, but it's also going to resonate for my 10-year-old. So I get it. But again, to your point, I don't think it's malicious. I don't think they're saying I want the kids to. I mean, like the activists will tell you that they're trying to get the kids hooked young or whatever, but I don't believe that's the case. I think it's just a nonchalance that still exists, but nowhere near to the degree that it did before, which is why I personally and VTA advocates for FDA to step in or FTC to step in, and let's implement some real marketing standards to address the issue.
So this is a question I asked members of the industry really early on in our coverage, late 2015, early 2016. I don't know if I've asked this on air recently, so here we go, because we're in it, okay? When we first started covering this topic, and I would hear from vape shop owners and advocates within the industry, and I put it to them because it's the first thing in my mind as a journalist was like, well, you know, eventually you're going to need new customers, which means young people who weren't smoking, eventually when they're adults, they're going to be wanting to try vaping. And that question comes from a liberty place where I think that's okay. I think a mild nicotine habit is okay as an adult. If you're allowed to, like in Canada, buy cannabis legally from the government, and nicotine, by the way, in a form that kills you, why can't you have the right to buy nicotine in a form that is safe? And if there happens to be a community around it and a sense of well-being, all the better, right? So I know that the regulators have doubted the story of vaping, and that is, well, we'll just want to take all the smokers and convert them, and once we get all of them, we'll be really happy, and I'll be happy to shut my store down and close my e-juice down. Yeah. But I didn't believe that then. I don't believe regulators have ever believed it. Anti-vaping activists certainly haven't. And so that's, when they see this happening with the kids, they're really just in a panic because they know that this whole thing this is the last ditch effort for them. Why else would they have gone to the extreme to at least, on perception of people who know better, believe that our public health agencies are lying to us about what caused the death and illness, and that they seem to be ambulance chasers and using that as a pretext to hammer down on vaping. And you can hear it. The governor of Michigan isn't talking about the lung deaths because she knows that that's not what caused it. She's talking about the epidemic of teen vaping, and we're not going to let another generation of young people become addicted to nicotine.
Yeah, right.
So I throw that out there is that this may have been something that the industry needed to do a little while ago, was to have a come to Jesus moment about where their customers are going to come from in 25 years. Because if they don't have an answer for that, then, that's what's causing this. Yeah.
Look, I should be clear on a couple of things. First of all, I actually do believe the stories. I don't think people are, most in the industry, because there's a huge number of vape shops, so most of them have their story of how they used vaping to quit smoking and they wanted to pass that benefit on to someone else. Sure. I don't think they're looking 25 years down the road. I have also heard the stories that you've heard that says that we'll stop when we stop. They're just they're not actively going after kids or non-smokers or even a new generation. And I'll say this, the market of smokers is, as you know, huge. Look at the number of deaths that are happening from cigarette smoking every year. That gives you just a tiny perspective of the number of people that are actively smoking cigarettes. And it's not going down anytime soon. In other words, there's a lot more market left to capture, a lot more people left to switch from cigarettes to vaping. It's going to keep everyone busy for quite some time. Now, as to what happens to these companies in 20 years or 15 years and whether or not at that point they might shift and say maybe it's not so bad for non-smokers, I've never heard that. I honestly, and I don't believe that.
But let me interrupt though. But fair enough. But you can't say that regulators aren't looking 10 years ahead time.
Of course they are.
They're not. The government's not thinking, oh, we're just regulating for 5 years. So if the industry is only thinking 10 or 5 or whatever, the regulator has to think 10, 20, 30.
And look, unfortunately, the cigarette companies in the past, they kind of created a reputation that the regulators are very astutely now looking to as their guidepost. They are trying to learn from history and to prevent the future issues that occurred with cigarette smoking back in the 50s and 60s and onward. But the difference here, and I think what is often forgotten in the discussion, is that this industry isn't all about big tobacco. In fact, it wasn't started by big tobacco, and big tobacco only jumped in, I'll say, quite late in the game. And so for these independent vape shops and the smaller and mid-sized players, those of us that are involved now, to get tarred with the brush that was really all about what the conduct of the big tobacco companies from the past. Even the big tobacco companies of today are very different from those companies. I just don't think it's necessarily fair. It's right to be conscious and aware of that. But now to go out and blame and say that is the intent, I really don't think that's the way these companies are operating today. I believe what I hear when I hear the bigger companies say that their goal is not to recruit non-smokers. In fact, even here at our company, the first question that we ask when someone calls in is whether or not they're a smoker or non-smoker. It's right up there with how old are you, of course. But we don't talk to people that are non-smokers, and I think most vape shops have the same policy.
So if you're an adult, 25 years old in the United States and have never smoked, should that person have a right to pick up vaping?
I don't know if they should have a right or not, but I'll say this, as our company and most VTA members that I know, we do not market to non-smokers. So I will say, as just using my company as an example, so I won't speak for the whole group, when one of those individuals approaches one of our events where we are looking for trial for smokers, the first thing we ask them at the door, how old are you and are you a smoker or non-smoker? If they say they're a non-smoker, non-tobacco user, they are not permitted entry. And I know that we're not alone in this.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about, but we are pretty darn strict. We restricted blue, and we're strict now. I imagine blue probably still is. We have a lot of policies, I believe, are still in place there. So I guess I'm speaking for some of the bigger companies. We do not actively advocate for non-smokers. Certainly, I could imagine some people in marketing maybe think about it sometimes, but it doesn't come up because we would not do it. And most vape shop owners are of the same mind.
And I only bring it up because it's just a wedge point, right? I think it's a vulnerability because what that does, and it's an opinion really, that I've got here, is that it makes vaping a lot less defensible when you have to say that there's something inherently wrong with it, that an adult who's got access to all the information that we have, shouldn't be allowed to make a choice for it. That's all.
No, I understand, and look, I'm not one of those people that calls vaping healthy, or I don't think most of us in the category don't say that. But what we do is we compare it to, and the reason we're only targeting smokers is we compare the benefits or the characteristics of an e-cigarette to the characteristics of a cigarette. And so, despite what you say, which I think does put us at a slight disadvantage, if we could say more, we don't need to say more. I mean, I think the evidence is very clear. Despite the fact that not all the research is done, it is very clear that e-cigarettes are significantly better for a smoker than smoking cigarettes.
So let's get back to the lung illness issue, because I want to put you on the spot to at least understand. You, in your position, or at least if you can even speak for VTA, but I'm asking about you, do you think that the CDC has misled?
I don't know if the word, well, I do think it was misleading the way that the reports came out. I don't think they're maybe intentionally trying to mislead. I think that they were probably gathering information and trying to do the right thing. I mean, they didn't know. But common sense would say traditional nicotine products have been on the market for 10 years, and you didn't see this event until these black market THC products containing the vitamin E acetate oil started circulating. I mean, you could think you could be a little more clear earlier, I would have thought. But I don't know how their information has come in, how they gather the information from each state. I'm sure that's difficult. And they were probably saying better safe than sorry. I don't think it was necessarily right. I'd rather them certainly not have characterized all vaping as a problem. I don't think the evidence necessarily supported that. But if I put myself in their shoes and I try to understand what they're facing and how they have to manage issues like this, I guess I understand at least why they did it. Now, given that so much evidence has come out to the contrary, I think they should be going overboard to correct what we'll call misinformation from before. I don't think that they're doing enough, CDC or any of these state health agencies, or many of them. But the story's not over. Like I said, it's an evolution. I think that the evidence is coming in slowly to them, and they're taking steps to correct it. So I'm not, I'm very disappointed in the way it was handled, but I don't have enough information regarding what they were dealing with internally to say, it was intentional.
So what about the media?
Well, the media, I think, has been misleading in many examples. In fact, look, what does everyone want to read? They want to read the sensationalist headline that's preying off of the youth issue from before, and so they don't take the time even to have this discussion that we're talking about, sort of an open discussion about what is the CDC truly dealing with. They just jump immediately to the one line that says all vaping should be avoided, and they run with that. We're both overgeneralizing here. There are plenty of media outlets that don't do this, but obviously the ones that get a lot of attention are the ones that do.
Yeah, there's definitely. I mean, there's a bit of a hate on, and
Yeah.
yeah, hate
Yes.
on with a pile on.
Yeah,
It's like
pile
hate
on.
on with pile on, right?
Right. Or both. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, look, it's no one should downplay any of the deaths or the illnesses. These are very horrifying stories. I personally can't believe it. I mean, I'm glad it didn't happen for 10 years with traditional nicotine vaping products, and I'm shocked that this is happening now. I'm very saddened by the whole thing. That said, the fact that traditional nicotine vaping products are getting caught up in the web here is way out of line, and I say that because the harm reduction element of these products is now not just an afterthought, it is totally forgotten in these discussions. And it really, the priority of harm reduction should be elevated, because who suffers in the long run? The smokers. All these youth that are experimenting and all that, I don't think that's good. These products are not for kids, but they're going to suffer too when their parents go back to smoking and all this. And we're forgetting that side of the story. That is supposed to be a balanced equation here. And right now it's not balanced.
Yeah, the media is just not talking about that at all.
Not at all. And it's not an exciting topic. I mean, it will be. I mean, if there is a flavor ban down the road and cigarette rates start ticking back up or the decrease starts lessening, trust me, harm reduction will become the big headline. But like I said, it's going to take a while to get there.
So if we're seeing 40% decrease, collapse is a better term in sales, we know that we're seeing that number too as well in Canada. So we're talking about a North American-wide massive, slashing of sales. These people, many of them are going back to smoking. It's already happened.
It's already.
I mean, that's happening.
It's already happening. I mean, we saw it in the recent Wells Fargo report that came out, and I was just at the NACS trade show, and many of our channel partners have described exactly what you're saying. Clearly, this is going to be an unintended consequence of the onerous regulation and the environment that's so confusing that we're in now.
Could you share some of the data top of mind there from the Wells Fargo?
Well, that just came out of Bonnie Herzog's today, and I don't remember exactly what she said, but she did report that there's been an uptick in an increase in cigarette sales. In fact, that she says something, and I don't want to speak for her, and I don't want to mischaracterize, but she was speaking positively about the Altria stock and how that this presents an opportunity, I guess, because cigarette volumes would not continue to decline. I mean, these people have to go somewhere to get their product. So if there is onerous regulation, they're either not going to make the switch, which helps Altria. I'm just using them as an example, but Reynolds and all the big tobacco, it helps them sustain their business. And you would imagine that it could increase because people that were just now trying eCigs or really like their strawberry flavor or whatever, they're going to probably go back to smoking cigarettes because that's something they're comfortable with and they know. And they certainly don't want a tobacco flavored eCig. I don't think that's going to be the choice.
So you're a vaping insider, but as you said right off the bat, you've got some experience on the tobacco side. I wouldn't want to call you a tobacco insider, but you've been inside some of those rooms working for them. We've got, you can imagine, there's tens and tens and tens of thousands of people out there in the vaping community that firmly believe that all of this is a result of big tobacco. You can go all the way as far as conspiracy. You could look at it as, well, it just makes sense that they're going to have been an antagonist to vaping. Maybe they actually were an antagonist back in the day, PR, against vaping, this and that. So you've got, because I've got you here and you're the insider, right? And we're talking about fallout. Let's just deal with the first bit. So there's two parts of tobacco. One, it's big tobacco fighting for its life and market share. And then there's the MSA, which is, dropping billions, and then, it's the suckling at the teat of big tobacco, which is all the states and tobacco control industry out there, and that's got to have an impact. And then obviously with the MSA, you've got the states that have, borrowed against that money. That's the kind of short pull there on that issue from big tobacco to MSA.
Yeah.
What of that, in your opinion, could you say is true?
It's funny because you can, like I said, you go on Twitter and you can see dozens, if not hundreds, of people saying that, oh, this particular state doesn't want to lose their MSA payments, so they're going to intentionally ban flavors and reduce the likelihood of smokers turning to e-cigarettes in order to keep cigarette sales where they are, because they need those sales high so their MSA payments remain high and they go from there. That to me sounds like such a conspiracy theorist. I mean, could you really imagine these government people that are so callous that they really believe that? I just have
I do believe it.
I don't know. I think I guess maybe it's just because I'm not like that, but I don't know if that's determinative for them. I mean, I'm sure in the back of their mind they might think, well, that's a good benefit, but I don't think that's driving the decisions as often as people claim.
Sure. I mean, obviously, are they sitting there with their calculators out and going, we have to have it, right? But never underestimate the darkness inside a politician's heart.
Fair enough.
Or worse, a bureaucrat's heart.
Well, look, and you don't want to be naive about it either, right? So is it worth talking about? I mean, maybe not in the inflammatory terms that they do on Twitter, but yeah, it's worth a discussion because you don't want that to happen either. I mean, that's really the worst possible reason to ban or limit e-cigs availability. As far as what the big tobacco companies' motives really are, like Altria with their investment in Juul and Blue and Reynolds, I mean, I think at least the way it's often portrayed inside and even outside, I mean, these companies are recognizing that there's an appreciation now for the harm caused by traditional combustible cigarettes, and they're modifying their business models in order to not just ride the decline. I mean, if they didn't go into these other areas like e-cigs or the CBD or whatever, then then they would go out of business. And of course, businesses are there to make money. And so I don't think it's necessarily that, for example, Altria wants to drive people back to cigarettes, but they probably do want IQOS to succeed. I mean, you certainly don't want it to fail. And so they're probably factoring all these things when they make their decisions.
So before we get off this topic, we've got just a couple of other issues I want to make sure we get to before we wrap. So we've got another probably 10, 15 minutes here, if you're okay with that. So, but here's something. Let me throw this at you, okay? The Democrats are so together on this issue. And if you look over the last couple of years, it's always like the 11, the 12, the 13 senators, the Democratic senators are always consistently just hammering away at vaping, just hammering away in coordination with Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, banging away, sending letters to FDA and so forth on this issue and on the flavors issue. They've just been hardcore on it. Now, some years ago, when I was taking a look at kind of the disarray a little bit when it came to all of the advocacy groups getting together, there's this goal, this utopian idea that I hear all the time is about we need unity, and I don't know when unity's ever been attainable in any political realm or any campaign without force to create unity. So I don't know how that unity is going to get there, but that utopia of unity seems to be the key thing that has been the stumbling block for advocacy groups and lobbying to be effective. Because you have to admit, it appears that this is real late in the game, that the effectiveness of the lobbying, I'm not blaming VTA, but there's been some issues clearly, or we would not be here attacked from all different realms, around that, right?
Yeah.
So there's a part of me, as an analysis of this, thinks that potentially the Democrats would be just happy dealing with big tobacco. They'd rather see all of the vaping stuff folded into big tobacco, close down all those shops, because then at least that way they can negotiate them into the MSA easily because they're part of big tobacco. And with this demonization campaign that is directly linked nicotine vaping to death.
Yeah.
In the minds of millions and millions and millions of consumers. So what that does is it allows now, vaping has now been put into the same risk category as tobacco, even though the science is not there.
No, definitely.
Right. And once they've done that, right, if they can sweep the market of not just the flavored products, but actually of all the small players, then that way, then in the end, they've got the risk profile, the same as deathly tobacco. You've only got big tobacco that can afford PMTA process and stay in the game. And then it's just really easy for money to be extracted from the vaping business now because it just falls under a newly negotiated MSA.
Yeah. I mean, look.
And one last thing.
Yeah,
Democrats know that they can work with big tobacco because they've been working with big tobacco since 1998.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I mean, and look, you bring up a good point here. So if you look at what is likely to happen because of these draconian restrictions which are being proposed, let's say there is a nationwide flavor ban, leaving just maybe tobacco and mint and menthol, right? Because I think that's possible, if not probable. We shouldn't even call it.
You think that's probable?
Well, I said possible, if not probable. I mean, there could be some. Look, if you take Commissioner Sharpless at his word, he doesn't use the word ban, but he'll use the PMTA process to at least have a short-term restriction here where essentially they clean up the market, right? The vape shops, like we just discussed, they can't survive without the flavors. Seems very unlikely. And then meanwhile, the harm reduction topic will again resurge now as important because the cigarette rates will really increase, very likely. And then you'll still have tobacco, mint, and menthol on the shelves at convenience stores. So what are you looking at then? Yes, you now have much fewer players if this is the way it all plays out. I mean, I said earlier that smokers maybe won't go to tobacco from their strawberry. And there's a bucket of smokers that loves strawberry e-liquid in an open system, and they are not going to go and buy a tobacco-flavored e-liquid in an open system. But as many as them, there's still plenty that are going to say, I recognize the truth that vaping is much safer than smoking, and they'll go to where they are. And that means they'll go to the big tobacco-provided products and some of the other few that are remaining on the shelves in convenience, and they'll probably switch to tobacco if that's all that's available. And so in the end, what you're describing is a scenario where because of this over-regulation, this onerous set of restrictions which is coming down the pike, whether we're talking about a flavor ban, T21, or ultimately the PMTA and what's required to succeed, the winners is big tobacco. It's those that can afford to play the game, to get in there, because I don't think FDA wants to ban all eCigs. That's not their intention. I mean, they want a market that's responsible, where the marketing is cleaned up, and that they're a little bit more in control, because there's been a time period here where they have been less in control. So who wins in the end? Tobacco companies and anyone, the very few companies that can afford to get the PMTA process. They can survive a window of time with just tobacco, mint, and menthol. To your point, once you have those fewer players, it very well may be easier to have. I don't know if they necessarily get lumped into the original MSA. I don't think that's necessarily the end result here, but there could be some form of an MSA that applies to whoever's left for the vaping category by itself. And if you're a Democrat, that's not a bad result, because you know how it turned out with cigarettes in the beginning. And so I don't think what you're saying here is a conspiracy theory at all. I actually think that there is some real truth there. I tell everyone, the vaping market isn't going to go away. I mean, America isn't that. They're not going to be total prohibition on e-cigarettes. It's just going to be potentially many fewer choices when this is all said and done.
Now, not only fewer choices, but the complete narrative, the virtue, will be stripped away.
Well, explain a little more what you mean by that. I mean,
right. Well, it goes to that story, right? That story, that belief that they're doing, you're doing something of a heroic nature, which I do believe, right?
Yes.
Like, early, the whole business really has just absolutely, fought tooth and nail to get this technology, to realize it, and it become multi-billions and billions and billions of dollars, right? And it's saved, if you believe it saved people's lives,
yeah.
which I do.
I do.
So many people, right? So that virtue will be gone.
Yeah.
It's the gutting of not just that, it's the deflation. It's the public's perception will never be the same. It was never all that good.
The passion may not be there to the same levels. I mean, again, we're risking overgeneralizing, because some companies will still be committed to harm reduction and the true virtue of the value of e-cigarettes. But yeah, when it becomes part of a big machine, like say Reynolds or Juul, maybe not as much. Certainly not as much as an independent vape shop where the owner watched their family and friends' lives all be saved thanks to e-cigarettes. I mean, you're going to have a different story to be told there, no question.
So two things. We are in the last of the deep stuff here. So the FDA ban When do you think that'll happen?
You know, of course, the moment I say I think it'll happen on X, it'll happen on Y. But look, if you look at what Director Zeller has said and what Commissioner Sharpless has said and some of the papers they filed in the Maryland litigation where they said it will be, quote, in several weeks, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if we see something in the next couple of weeks.
Right. And you said, so just to be clear for our viewers, you believe that it's likely it would be menthol and...
That one I don't know. I mean, I think we will see some restriction proposed by FDA on flavors. Right. I do not know. I don't think anyone who says they know. I do not know with certainty whether mint and menthol will be included. But when you step back and try to be objective about it, how can you take menthol off the shelf when you have menthol cigarettes right there next to it? So common sense would say they would allow mint and menthol, but I know there's a lot of differing opinions on that issue, especially with how the Juul story has panned out. So I'm optimistic that at a minimum, mint and menthol are left intact.
Well, if it wasn't for double standards, bureaucracy wouldn't have any standards at all.
Fair enough. Look, right. I am actually optimistic that flavors remain intact. And I think even if FDA comes out with a proposal, they're very likely to be challenged on multiple fronts. So even when I say I think it's possible, if not probable, that we see some major restrictions on flavors, it doesn't mean that it's going to just happen. I mean, there will be a battle here. Now, how it plays out, I'm not sure.
Sure, I've got it. I've totally got it. I mean, if you could be a soothsayer for us, I'd be pulling out my wallet and getting ready to invest in some form of stock. So, okay, so as we're just real fast here, Trump's ban, and I'm just choking, thinking that how could we have not... Look, how could VTA not build a wall of knowledge around the president? Like, easily figured out that, that he's going to be surrounded by progressives trying to, eat his lunch, and we didn't surround him with a wall of knowledge.
Well, I mean, in fairness, look, VTA does an extreme amount of advocacy. I mean, we meet with multiple congressmen every month and their staffs in an effort to educate them regarding the category. You'd be surprised at how many of them have never actually touched an e-cig. I mean, it's amazing, but when you're in the business, you just think that everyone has. So we're out there educating all the time, and honestly, President Trump has never, and this is 3 years now, has never really thrown himself into these kinds of issues. And so I wouldn't say that we avoided President Trump. In fact, we've met with the vice president's office and others all around him. But I will say we certainly didn't anticipate what happened on September 11th. That's for sure. Not to say that we could have done anything about it. I mean, September 11th was a result of the completion of the issues that we discussed earlier. It's unfortunate the way that spiraled, I'll say, out of control. Of course, we immediately engaged and are doing our part to correct that. But to your point, I mean, it was a very unexpected turn of events.
There was some reporting that it looked like that, the message was getting through with regard to how many businesses are going to be hurt. The fact that, vape retail is like one of the top growing, sectors in the last 10 years, like phenomenally and everything else. But even then, after all of that happened, there was still one more message came back from the White House and said, we're not listening. Is that true?
Look, who are we to speak for the president and the way all that works? I think there's definitely been at least a walk back from the original moment of September 11th. I mean, later that same day, President Trump tweeted that he likes vaping and he supports it, but we got to be careful of those counterfeit products. So he walked back a little bit from the idea of we're just going to ban everything. And then subsequently, the First Lady came out with a couple of meetings, I guess it was, where she talked about the emphasis of really we got to watch the marketing. So I think the messaging there is certainly better than it was. And when I say watch the marketing, I mean, employ marketing standards, not necessarily an all-out ban. So I think personally that they're probably now deferring to the White House, to FDA.
FDA, right.
But, at the same time, we've had some other positive developments. A couple of executive orders the other day challenging the regulatory agency's usage of guidance inappropriately, and there's some sort of cracking down on that. I mean, I don't know where the White House ends up on this. I'm not sure if they're going to be key to the end of the story, but at least I don't think that they're not leading the charge, at least not now.
So FDA is likely, obviously, to be the most immediate thing to happen nationally. There's the congressional bill the bill in Congress, and that's, I mean, we're talking much longer if that's to be in place, correct?
I mean, look, there's a lot of bills pending in Congress that impact the category. There were 2 hearings today, talking about flavor bans and nicotine level restrictions and internet sales and all kinds of things. Those obviously take longer. I think the most immediate thing we're going to see is whatever action the FDA takes. And if you recall, FDA in March of this year issued some guidance which proposed certain restrictions on the sale of flavored vapor products in non-adult age-restricted locations. So you can imagine, in light of everything else that's occurred since March, it will probably be worse than that. And by that, I mean more restrictive in terms of how and where flavors are allowed to be sold, if at all.
How many companies do you think, U.S.-based companies, are going to be big enough and have the resources to go through PMTA?
I think not many. Not many, unless there are changes that occur in between now and the date that they're ultimately due, which there still could be changes. There's a lot. It's funny. I'm glad you bring it up, because in light of all of these issues we're facing with regard to the black market THC products and the recent lung illnesses and deaths and all of that, what gets forgotten? The PMTA process gets forgotten. And as you probably know, the standards are, I'll just say, cost prohibitive. It's multiple millions of dollars just to get a handful of SKUs through. And so if those standards remain intact, and by that I mean if you're going to take them literally and you're going to try to be part of a highly regulated industry, it is going to be expensive. And how many companies can achieve those goals, which I don't anticipate many changes, not that many companies can do it, less than 20. Now, I want to be clear. There are many efforts out there. There are coalitions of e-liquid providers that are working with law firms and trying to help influence FDA's perspective regarding what is necessary to meet the goals of the PMTA process. I encourage all vape shops to look into those coalitions rather than just walk away from the category entirely. But as we get closer and closer to the date, I think we'll see exactly what you're suggesting, and that is that certainly the mom and pop independent vape shops won't be able to do it, and most other companies will not be able to get through with more than a handful of SKUs.
So what's the message then for the thousands and thousands of vape shops out there?
I mean, look, I said this at the VTA conference, and I said, now you've already been in this battle a long time, and there are some passionate advocates, most passionate group that I've ever been a part of, and I don't think today is the day to give up. I mean, you've already invested so much, and you have a very positive mission statement, and you need to keep fighting for harm reduction until all is not lost. I mean, many of them, as you probably know, are already looking at different business models, whether entering CBD or some other, or becoming tobacco shops and that kind of a thing, and they just have to decide what their risk tolerance is. And if they got to keep evaluating that every day, because as you know, the news changes every day, and we know we're successful on one day, and we take it back to 2017, when everyone thought it was over. And what happened? Commissioner Gottlieb came and gave a 4-year extension of time to complete the PMTAs. And everyone said, oh, the industry is saved. Well, look, we could still have one of those moments. I mean, it's not going to come easy. I think there's, again, a lot of work that has to be done to get there. But it's not time necessarily to abandon the cause. That's what I would tell them.
Not time to pack it in. Well, that's about as good of a message as I think that anyone could get right now. Before we wrap up, I just want to make sure that we inform our viewers that we definitely need your help here too at RegWatch. If you could go to support.regulatorwatch.com and find your way to your wallet and a little bit of that moolah per month, that would be fantastic. We certainly need your help to be able to provide this fine coverage. And we've got some more traditional taped coverage coming. The full interview with Dr. Leon Shahab will be on its way. And the first of our little whole true series, just the news series we're going to do. I'm going to try to put together all of the information that we've got from the CDC through for the first 2 months and kind of track that with the media if we can, and kind of paint the picture for somebody who is not from vaping, for them to kind of see how that message has been skewed, how the deaths went up, and how the message didn't change from the CDC until much later. It'll be interesting to see. So again, please go to support.regulatorwatch.com and contribute monthly. It'd be most appreciated. So, Chris, well, I want to thank you, my friend, for coming on the show. It was fantastic to have you. If I can, just 1 second. I don't know why I can't get off this damn slide every time. 1 second. There we go. It was very nice to have you, and thank you for going through the little bit of a late start. Where can people go to help with the VTA effort?
Yeah, I mean, look, we certainly can go to us on our website. We have Vapor Technologies website, very easy to find. Type it on Google, it's the first things that comes up. And we also have a Twitter handle, Facebook, all of that. And I encourage anyone who's looking to contribute to the advocacy to do exactly that. And by that, not necessarily consumers, we're not a consumer organization, but we are in the fight and we are not giving up. And we certainly welcome support from everyone in the industry.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks very much to Chris, and that's it for this edition of RegWatch. I'm Brent Stafford. Please make sure you go to support.regulatorwatch.com, contribute monthly, find us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Thanks very much for watching.